No way he just said this. Three fighters have taken to social media for a verbal back and forth that will have ripple effects across the entire UFC. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This is MMA 365, the greatest UFC YouTube channel, so be sure to subscribe, especially because Yuri Prohaska is lost in the woods, and I'm trying to get him out, but he will not cooperate with me, and in order to rescue him, you need to hit that subscribe button. Thank you. So let's get right into it. We had this morning, Joshua Van tweeted, "There goes the rematch," and Manel Kape responded, "Don't forget, you're only in this position because I broke my foot and you replaced me against Brandon Royval. Everyone saw what happened once I came back from injury, that being Manel Kape knocking out Brandon Royval. So stop this rematch BS. He knocked you out cold. There is no rematch. You're fighting me. Give me 4 weeks. That's all I need to put you back in diapers." Truly, very eloquent stuff here. Joshua Van is referring to Charles Johnson here, who did knock him out and gave him his only loss in the UFC, but then Van went on a meteoric rise since then, and Charles Johnson got knocked out last weekend going against Alex Perez. So unfortunately for Charles Johnson, his championship rematch arc seems indefinitely postponed, but Manel Kape took to Twitter, got his keyboard fingers ready, and typed up this jab. Manel Kape also said, "Let me explain what this idiot is talking about. First of all, there never was a contract. Second, the UFC considered me fighting Joshua last Saturday, but they only told me 1 week before. And obviously there's no way I'd make weight in 1 week. And if I missed weight, I'd be more frozen than Arman Tsarukyan. Let's do things the right way." To which Joshua Van said, "Shut up. You didn't want to sign the contract." And while I do think Manel Kape is being reasonable here, it is surrounded by a bunch of very eloquent trash talk. But I do think he makes a good point that 1 week to make 125 pounds is asking a lot, especially when Manel Kape is a very big flyweight. Although I do think it is very important to mention that the reason why Joshua Van is in this position as champion to begin with is because he stepped up on short notice to fight Brandon Royval. So while Manel Kape might be right, I really don't think that this is a very good argument to make on Twitter. Kape responded, "What kind of contract are you talking about, you moron? I know you're an individual with significant intellectual limitations, so I'll give you a discount. If you want me to sign a contract, let's sign it for March 7th. Which Joshua Van says, "March 7th, let's do it. Taira, stay ready in case Gyno Boy comes up with another excuse." March 7th, this is the card headlined by Max Holloway versus Charles Oliveira, and I would like this because that card does feel one fight away from being a great card to watch. Tatsuro Taira, he chimed in, "Don't bring up another name, prove it, face my jiu-jitsu, March 7, contract." Very succinct. I do think Tatsuro Taira is a strong contender, but face my jiu-jitsu, it's just not very powerful aura, especially after this very stimulating back and forth conversation. So while I like Taira, while I think he has a shot against either of these guys, looking at the writing on the wall and reading the tea leaves, it does feel like Manel Kape will get his shot first. And I do think Manel Kape calling dibs on a title shot and getting it first is warranted. He colded Brandon Royval in the Apex. I have never seen Brandon Royval get put in that position before, and that's something that not even Joshua Van could do. And compared it to Tatsuro Taira, who submitted the other Brandon Moreno, Manel Kape just put out a much stronger statement win. So I feel like if you're the UFC, you have to ride Manel Kape's momentum, especially coming off of this exchange. And while these guys did shout out the date of March 7th, I think the better fit would be the card in Miami that I believe is on April 11th and has yet to have either a main event or a co-main event announced. Usually the UFC wants to put on a banger fight in Miami every year around this time, but looking at the current set of champions, it is pretty hard to find a match. Volkanovski, he's fighting this weekend. Petr Yan and Merab. I wouldn't necessarily expect Merab to be fully recovered by then. I expect that fight to happen in May or June. Justin Gaethje just fought, and Ilia Topuria, he'll probably still be on break. And Khamzat Chimaev sustained a foot injury in training. I think he's supposed to be out until April. And then obviously Tom Aspinall, he had his double eye injury, so he'll be out probably until late summer, fall. So if I'm the UFC, I would take this opportunity to have a title fight in Miami, and hopefully you can get one more on there. I feel it in my bones that Alex Pereira is about to be back. He was in the news lately with his shindig with Tracy Cortez, and I just feel like this is right about time for him to come back. I do think that he could move up to heavyweight to fight Cyril Gane for an interim belt, but if that doesn't happen, then a fight against Carlos Ulberg for the lightweight title would also be a good fit. I know the UFC generally likes, if there are 2 title fights on a card, having the lighter fighters or the women fight on the co-main event and then the heavier fighters as the main event, but I don't think that should be a tried and true rule. On the last card that Joshua Van did fight against Pantoja, I thought going into it that Van versus Pantoja should have been the main event, and Merab versus Petr Yan should have been the co-main event. Obviously, in hindsight, it's kind of glad that it didn't happen that way because Pantoja got injured and it was rough to watch while Petr Yan put on a clinic. But I do think that Joshua Van does have enough star power to be the main fight, and I do also think it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that guys in the flyweight division might lack star power because the UFC doesn't give them the main fight. I get the sense that Pantoja should be back fairly soon, which is very good to hear, given that his injury did look gruesome. And there's a lot of potential fights to be made later this year because we have 4 very strong contenders, and I want these guys to sort it out. Each of these guys has their own attributes and skill sets that are fairly unique at the top of the division, and I feel like it could be a fairly big rock, paper, scissors type of matches coming up over the next, call it 18 months or so, where no fighter necessarily racks up a bunch of title defenses, but there's a bunch of interesting stylistic matchups to be made. Fights are more exciting as a fan when you get the impression that the fighters don't like each other and that there is actual grudge and passion in there. And I'm sure after the fight, if they do fight, both of these guys will give a little side hug in the octagon and do the usual show of respect. But leading up to it, it does make for really good promotion, and it makes me much more excited than sort of just any old matchup. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe. Yuri Prohaska is lost in the woods, and I know that he's saying that he's okay, but I know Yuri, and I know he needs to get out of there, and the only way we can get him out and have him find shelter is for you to hit that subscribe button. Thank you for watching.